No, I don't think so, but we're not in a marriage, and I don't want to be in that.
They say the truth sets you free. But in Kody Brown's courtroom, the truth detonated like a bomb. In a hushed room filled with silence and shattered vows, one letter would become the wrecking ball that tore apart what little was left of a crumbling empire. This isn't just a trial, it's a reckoning, a public unmasking. A love triangle imploding under oath. And it all began with one woman's voice, written in ink. The courtroom was thick with tension, like the seconds before a storm. Janelle sat still, hands folded, a quiet power in her posture. Kody, his expression unreadable, was flanked by Robyn, who clutched her purse like it might protect her from the words to come. The air was electric. Cameras were not allowed. But the press. Outside buzzed like bees circling a broken hive. Inside, the judge cleared his throat and said simply, "Mrs. Robyn Brown, you may approach the bench with your submission." The room tilted. Janelle's gaze didn't flinch. Kody blinked rapidly. Robyn stood. In her trembling hands, she held a sealed envelope. As Robyn approached the stand, the court clerk took the envelope. The judge adjusted his glasses, nodded, and said, "You requested to submit a written statement to be read and to record." Robyn's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." "Is it your handwriting?" "Yes." "Is it truthful to the best of your knowledge?" "It is." The judge nodded again and handed the letter to the court reader. Robyn stepped back. Her face was pale. Her lips trembled. She didn't look at Janelle, not once. The reader began to speak. But what echoed through the room wasn't just a statement. It was an unraveling. Robyn Brown had always been the soft voice, the tearful one. The woman who stood behind Kody while others fell away. But under oath her words would finally speak louder than her silence, and they would burn. I write this with no intention to hurt, but with a heart full of pain. It's Janelle. I never hated you, but I was afraid of you. You were stronger than me, louder than me, more real than me. And Kody, he clung to me because I cried while you walked away. Gasps, a rustle of discomfort in the benches. I watched your children grow bitter, and I said nothing. I knew they were hurting, but Kody was my world. My children were his only safe space. I protected that at your expense. Kody shifted uncomfortably. When you left, he collapsed. But not because he loved you more than me, because he couldn't control you anymore. That frightened him and me. The letter went on, each word another dagger, every sentence tearing deeper into years of lies. Janelle sat motionless. Her fingers didn't twitch. But her eyes were sharp, alive, burning. The judge paused the reading briefly to ask if Robyn was prepared for the letter's full content to be entered into the public record. Robyn, voice cracking, nodded. Yes. Let them hear it all. And so they did. Kody couldn't admit it, Janelle. But you terrified him. You questioned. You challenged. You didn't smile through disappointment like I did. You reminded him he was mortal, fallible, not the hero in the story he told himself. Janelle's attorney glanced at her, silently checking if she was okay. She didn't blink. There were nights Kody asked me why you were so cold. I told him maybe you weren't cold. Maybe you were just tired of pretending. A pin could have dropped and shattered glass. I write this not to beg for forgiveness, but to finally speak without trembling. I stood beside Kody while you stood alone. But now I see you were never alone. You had truth, and I only had fear. The courtroom sat frozen in disbelief. It wasn't a confession. It was a funeral. Not of a marriage, but of a myth. The myth that Robyn was innocent, that Kody was blameless. That silence was love. Kody stood, interrupting the final paragraph. Your Honor, I'd like to object this letter. It's personal, not legal. The judge didn't even look up. Mr. Brown, you had your chance. You chose silence. Robyn stared at Kody. For the first time, her expression wasn't pleading. It was hollow. Kody sat down, and the final paragraph was read. To my children, I see now what I asked of you, to ignore your siblings, to not ask where Dad was when they cried. To Janelle, I see you, I always did. But I chose not to stand with you, because standing with you meant standing against the man I loved. And I wasn't brave enough. The letter ended. The room exhaled. The judge looked. To Janelle, Mrs. Brown, do you have a response? She stood calm, composed, and in a voice that didn't shake. She said, I don't need to respond, Your Honor. The letter said what I've known for years. She turned to Robyn. But I will say this. You may have been afraid of me. But I was never afraid of you. I was afraid of what silence could do to a soul. And now I know. It turns women into shadows. She nodded at the judge, sat down. The courtroom didn't clap. But they didn't breathe either. The letter was entered into evidence, but it had already done its damage. Not to Janelle. Not even to Robyn, but to Kody Brown, the man who built a kingdom on quiet wives and broken truths. Part 1 ends here. But the silence was only just beginning to scream. The judge leaned forward, her face unreadable, the silence in the room. Drawn taut like a violin string. It's Brown. She said, Are you prepared to read your letter aloud? Robyn's hands shook as she unfolded the paper, a trembling breath catching in her throat. Her eyes scanned the courtroom. Kody was now a stone, unreadable. Janelle didn't blink. The court clerk hit record. Robyn began, her voice hoarse. To the court, to Janelle, and to my conscience. I never meant to tear this family apart. Gasps stirred as she read. The paper was stained with old teardrops, corners bent, clearly read and rewritten over many sleepless nights. Her words were carefully chosen, yet laden with contradictions. She admitted to moments of jealousy, of wishing for a life where she didn't have to share her husband. She confessed to struggling with plural marriage. She described nights where she'd lock the bedroom door, not from fear, but from guilt. There were times I believed I was protecting Kody from sadness, she read. But now I see. I was protecting myself from the truth. The courtroom, silent before, now throbbed with an invisible pulse. Even the court reporter had slowed. Her typing visibly moved. Robyn's voice cracked as she approached the final paragraph. And Janelle, I owe you 1,000 unspoken apologies. I stood by while you were abandoned, not just by Kody, but by me. You raised your children alone while I lived in a mansion filled with lies. I justified everything to keep peace. But peace never came. Only silence. I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to know. I see it now. She folded the letter. The air felt thick with the heat of everything that had never been said out loud in the show's 17 years. It's Janelle.com until now. Took off her glasses and looked straight at Robyn. And for the first time in the proceeding, her voice broke. The stillness. You didn't just stand by, Robyn, she said clearly, calmly. You built a life on top of what I lost. You watched my sons cry. You watched Kody turn his back, and you didn't flinch. And then you said, I don't know. Why she's so angry? So angry. Robyn parted her lips to respond, but Janelle wasn't finished. You kept saying, I want the family back together. But only when the cameras were on. Only after Kody had made his choice. Don't stand there pretending you didn't know which side of the porch you were standing on. The air in the room tightened. No shouting, no tears. Janelle delivered her words like a blade, controlled, deliberate, and devastating. Even the judge held her breath. Then Janelle turned her gaze to the bench, her voice steady, her eyes shining. I'm not here for vengeance. I want truth. This courtroom, this family deserves to understand why it collapsed. And now we do. The gavel cracked through the tension. Recess. Robyn crumpled into her seat. Kody remained motionless. The bailiff stepped forward. The gallery began to empty, but the whispers now thundered. Reporters scribbled frantically. Court staff looked, shaken. Outside, the press had already gathered like thunderclouds on the horizon. The court reconvened, but neutrality was gone. The air had turned electric, scorched by revelation. Robyn Brown had shattered the long-standing silence that encased the sister wives' empire. And what poured out wasn't sympathy. It was scrutiny. Cameras flashed as everyone re-entered. Kody marched slightly ahead of Robyn, his jaw clenched, eyes forward, hands rigid with contained fury. Janelle walked in composed, flanked by her lawyer and two of her sons who had silently joined her. During the break, their presence said more than words. She was no longer alone. The judge peered above her glasses. "Mr. Brown," she said calmly, "you've remained silent. Do you like to speak before we proceed?" Kody hesitated. His eyes darted from Robyn to Janelle, then to the media lenses watching. At last, he rose. What followed wasn't remorse, not even close. His voice rang out, clipped and cold like a CEO defending a crumbling brand. "I've always done what I believed was right," Kody began. "I tried to preserve the family while navigating through separation. And let me be clear that pain didn't start with Robyn. It started with insubordination, with a lack of respect." A ripple moved through the courtroom. He pressed on. "I was managing for marriages, for dynamics, for homes, and honestly, Janelle didn't want reconciliation. She chose to walk away." He turned dramatically, speaking as if to an invisible jury. "This idea that I abandoned her, that's one-sided. I reacted to her detachment. She was always fiercely independent. Less a wife, more a business partner." Janelle didn't flinch, not a blink. She simply looked at him the way a woman looks when the illusion finally breaks. And then she rose. "If I was only a partner," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "it's because I had to be. While you were chasing status, I was raising our children alone." Her tone sharpened, the calm giving way to heat. "You claim I pulled away? No, Kody, I held this family together while you couldn't decide which wife was worthy of your time. I homeschooled, I paid bills, I cooked, I cleaned, sacrificed. I made birthdays happen, the ones you forgot. And all I ever asked for was your presence." Just that. A wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. Even Robyn's composure cracked. But Janelle wasn't done. She fixed her eyes on the judge. "And when I finally asked for that, when I needed a father, not a preacher, not a reality TV character, you disappeared. You labeled me disrespectful. You punished me for having a voice." Then unexpectedly Gabriel Brown stood up from the gallery. The judge arched an eyebrow. "Do you wish to testify?" Gabriel nodded. Permission was granted. He took the stand. And the room leaned forward breathless. "I wasn't going to say anything," he began, steady. Eyes fixed on Kody, "but I've watched my mom be erased in front of millions. Brushed off like she's bitter. But I remember..." He stared at his father. "I remember that COVID call. I remember crying on my birthday. I remember being told we couldn't see Yubi because Robyn said we didn't respect the protocols. I remember watching you choose her over us." Kody shifted. Uneasy, Gabriel's voice remained unshaken. "I remember Mom holding me, telling me not to hate you." The room fell silent. "And I remember that being the moment I stopped trying, because I knew I was never going to matter again." He stepped down. Robyn dabbed at her eyes. This time, no theatrics. Just pain, Kody. He didn't reach for her. Didn't glance at Gabriel. He stared at the desk, boiling. Janelle turned again to the judge. "I'm not here for custody. The kids are grown. I'm not here for revenge. But I am here for accountability. Emotional, legal, financial." She placed a thick folder on the table. "These are the unpaid responsibilities. Child support, business debts, verbal agreements made off camera. He promised we'd build on Coyote Pass, promised we were equals." She pointed straight at Robyn. "She's living in $1 million house. I'm in a rental, and I've funded part of that land too. The judge flipped through the pages, brows furrowed. Are you saying you received no share of the property? Returns. No, Your Honor, Janelle replied firmly. I'm saying I was deceived. Robyn leaned toward her mic. I didn't know she hadn't been paid. Her voice trembled. I thought the land was still in all our names. She turned to Kody. Did you? Transfer the deeds. Silence. All eyes locked onto Kody. He looked up slowly, face unreadable. It's complicated, he muttered. The judge's voice cracked the air. Mr. Brown, did you transfer the deeds solely to yourself or to yourself and Ms. Brown? Kody paused. Yes, he said at last, temporarily. For tax reasons. Robyn recoiled. You said we were still united, still in it together. Janelle stood again. And that, Your Honor, that is the betrayal. Not just emotional. Not just favoritism, but fraud. Deception, written in ink. The courtroom had transformed. It's no longer just a chamber of law, but a burial ground. Every buried promise from Coyote Pass had clawed back to the surface, lies, loss. A crumbling patriarch. Robyn looked devastated. Gabriel held his mother's hand tightly. Kody, he sat frozen. Finally staring down what happens when fantasy ends and reality becomes a legal proceeding. And waiting just outside the doors, a title officer. Holding documents, receipts, proof. The judge called court back into session. The gavel struck loud as a gunshot in a war zone. The cameras had been removed, but the real drama had only just begun. And no one could look away. The walls of that courtroom now held ghosts. Ghosts of a family undone. He cleared his throat and stood. Your Honor, he began, his voice low, almost rehearsed. There's been a lot of emotion in here today. I understand that. But I want to be clear, I didn't abandon anyone. I followed where love still existed. Murmurs rose. Janelle looked away. Silence spoke louder than his carefully measured words. Kody continued. I spent years trying to be everything for everyone. Wanted harmony. Wanted us all under one roof again. But it became impossible. There was too much resentment, too much independence. He glanced sideways at Janelle, his tone shifting with subtle condescension. You made it clear, Janelle, that you didn't want my leadership. That you wanted to parent your way? Run. Your life, your way, live. Without compromise. That's not how plural marriage works. That was the wrong chord to strike. Janelle sat forward, her composure never once cracking. No, Kody, she said firmly. What you wanted was submission. And when you didn't get it, you called it rebellion. The gallery tensed again. Kody opened his mouth, but Janelle cut him off not with volume, but with truth. You started punishing my children the moment they disagreed with you. You stopped showing up. You stopped calling. And when you chose Robyn, yes, I said, chose you, didn't just leave our marriage, you left them. Left their birthdays, their graduations, their pain. Robyn reached out to touch Kody's arm. He jerked away. Janelle stood now, voice rising not in anger, but in a kind of quiet, righteous heartbreak. You turned their tears into disobedience. You called their trauma disrespect. And then you turned to the cameras and played the victim. You keep saying you wanted harmony, she continued. But the only harmony you ever recognized was silence hours. As long as we didn't speak, didn't complain, didn't challenge you, you called that peace. And the moment we asked for accountability, her voice dropped. You disappeared. Robyn burst into tears. This time, real uncontrolled sobs. Her face was flushed, makeup smeared. I didn't know he was doing that, she cried. I thought they were just being difficult. Janelle's gaze sharpened. You didn't ask, Robyn. You never asked, 'cause you were too busy building a castle on the ashes of our home. Robyn collapsed into herself. Kody looked pale now, blinking fast. He looked toward the judge, then back at Janelle, then down anywhere but into the eyes of the woman he once called wife. The judge raised a hand. "Enough," she said. "This isn't a custody battle. This isn't even a property case anymore. This is a reckoning." She turned to Kody. "You've been on national television for more than a decade. Do you understand that this courtroom is perhaps the first time your wives have had uninterrupted time to speak truth to you?" Kody, speechless, nodded slowly. "And you," she said, turning to Robyn, "may very well be sincere in your apology, but sincerity without action is a performance. You've asked for forgiveness, but are you prepared for accountability?" Robyn looked up, her face crumbling. "I don't know." "Then it's time you learned," the judge replied. "Because this isn't just family drama. This is emotional abandonment. And for some of these children, what borders on negligence? A hush fell." The judge leaned back, pressing her fingers together. "Court will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. Sharp, Ms. Brown, you may bring evidence of financial mismanagement. Mr. Brown, you may prepare a statement. But consider this your final warning. This court is not a stage for denial." The gavel dropped once more. The courtroom exploded not in volume, but in emotion. Robyn sobbed. Kody looked small, rattled. Janelle stood tall, resolute. She gathered her things without a word and walked out not just of the courtroom, but of the shadows that had held her silent for far too long. Outside, reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. But Janelle didn't stop. She walked down the steps like a woman who had just buried something and was now ready to live. The tension in the courtroom hadn't dissolved with the recess, it had thickened. When the doors reopened and the judge resumed her seat, the air was electric. Kody sat like a statue, but behind that calm facade, the cracks were spreading fast. Robyn hadn't looked up since reading her letter. Her eyes were red, her hands twisted in her lap. She looked like a woman who had climbed a mountain of lies, only to discover there was no air left at the top. The judge motioned toward Kody. "Mr. Brown," she said, "you've had the opportunity to hear both sides. You may respond." He stood, slowly, deliberately. Not a wrinkle out of place, not a flicker of regret on his face. He cleared his throat and looked directly at Janelle. "I never stopped loving you," he began. Janelle blinked, then chuckled quietly. The audience press aides, even a bailiff stirred at the sound. "I tried," Kody continued, "to hold our family together. But everyone has their limits. I wasn't the only one making mistakes." Janelle's jaw set, but she didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The courtroom was already reacting. Kody's tone was flat, rehearsed, polished, but hollow. He spoke of pressure, exhaustion, the weight of leading a plural family. He never once used the word sorry. Robyn didn't ask for favoritism, he said. She was just easier to be with. She gave me peace when the others gave me grief. That line, it landed like a thunderclap. The judge's brow furrowed. Janelle inhaled sharply, finally speaking. "Peace," she said, her voice a whisper sharpened by years of betrayal. "You don't want peace. You want obedience." Kody opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "You chose comfort over commitment. Robyn didn't seduce you, you seduced yourself into believing you were the victim. You hid behind your priesthood, your camera angles, your twisted version of fairness. But deep down, you knew exactly what you were doing." Kody's face reddened. He took a step forward, but the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Brown, you will not approach the witness," she said. Her tone was neutral, but it rang like a warning bell. Robyn was silently crying now, mascara bleeding down her face. This wasn't just courtroom fallout. This was the spiritual unraveling of a house of cards they'd built together. Brick by illusion, window by denial. Then came the moment that split everything open. The judge reached into a manila folder and pulled out a single sheet. "This is an affidavit from Ms. Christine Brown, submitted prior to today's hearing," she announced. The courtroom gasped. Christine hadn't been expected to participate, but she had sent her voice through paper. The judge began reading. I lived this marriage for 26 years. I bore witness to the imbalance long before cameras were present. I raised 6 children and buried my needs so often I forgot what they were. Kody did not simply fall in love with Robyn. He abandoned the rest of us emotionally years before it was official. Janelle's face didn't change, but her fists clenched at her sides. Robyn may have been his legal wife, but we were the ones who kept the family functioning. She didn't destroy the family. She simply stepped into a role Kody had already crafted for her, a monogamous wife in a plural costume. By the time the judge finished reading, the silence was deafening. Kody sat back down, not in control, not confident, cornered. Robyn finally whispered something too quiet to catch. But her lips had formed the words, "I didn't know." Janelle turned toward her not with pity, but with precision. "No," she said. "You didn't want to know?" The judge looked over the courtroom, now no longer a place of legal procedure, but a cathedral of reckoning. Truth, finally, was having its day not in shouting matches or tabloid headlines, but in the quiet collapse of denial. "Court will resume tomorrow for closing statements," the judge announced. "But let it be known, this is no longer a case of financial mismanagement. It is a case of relational negligence." A spiritual divorce played out in public view. The gavel struck, but no one moved. Because outside, the press had already begun writing the next headline. Inside, the walls had heard everything. For once, the silence was no longer protecting the guilty. As the courtroom reconvened after recess, a hush fell over the crowd once again. But the air had shifted. There was no more sympathy for Robyn, no more awe of Kody. What lingered now was something deeper: recognition. The public, the press. The very walls of the courtroom, everyone saw what Janelle had always known. The empire of sister wives was a palace built on sand. Judge Hardwick adjusted her robe and leaned forward. "Mrs. Brown," she said, "you've requested the opportunity to present your financial case and statement. Are you prepared?" Janelle stood. She wore no theatricality, no legal armor, just her dignity and a yellow manila envelope in her hands. She walked to the front, every step a testament to the years she had carried more than her share. And when she opened that envelope, it was as if she tore open the vault of memory itself. "These are receipts," Janelle began, her voice clear, unwavering. "Statements, wire transfers, and signed agreements. Proof that I funded Kody's dreams while raising 6 children nearly alone." Kody shifted in his seat. Janelle laid out the evidence. The down payment she made on a plot of land that was later sold without her consent. The pooled family account she had contributed to only to learn it had been emptied to finance Robyn's home. The joint business endeavors promised but never delivered. The courtroom gasped when she revealed a letter from the bank addressed to her, guarding a defaulted property payment. "I didn't even know my name was on the loan," she said, her hands trembling. She paused. "While Kody and Robyn were picking out chandeliers, I was buying groceries with coupons." I stayed silent, thinking someday loyalty would be rewarded. She turned to face Kody now, her words laced with fire. But silence only fed the illusion. "And now, here we are." Robyn looked down, shame rising visibly in her face. Kody attempted to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Brown, you'll be given your time. Let your former wife speak." Janelle's next move took everyone by surprise. She reached for a slim red notebook, a diary. "These are entries I wrote during the last 3 years. I want the court to hear what life was like behind the curtain." She read, voice steady. "March 14th, Kody told me he didn't know what he felt anymore, that I wasn't being obedient. I wasn't submissive enough. I didn't cry, so he said. I must not care." July 9th. Gabriel begged his dad to come to his graduation. Kody said he had other obligations. I said nothing. Couldn't afford the fight. December 25th, I made dinner. It's just me and the kids. Kody spent the evening with Robyn. He sent a text. That was Christmas. By now, there were tears in the room. Not just from spectators, but from jurors, reporters. Even Judge Hardwick blinked hard. It was no longer a custody or financial case. It was the unraveling of a myth. And then, just when the court believed the climax had arrived, G&L dropped one final bombshell. I was served a notice from our production company last year, she said. Apparently, Kody and Robyn had renegotiated the contract. They were receiving nearly double what the rest of us were. A wave of murmurs rolled across the room. They cashed in on our family, she whispered, and left the rest of us with scraps. And shame. Robyn burst into quiet sobs, covering her mouth. Kody, red-faced, stood abruptly. This is slander, he barked. This is twisted truth. But Janelle didn't flinch. No, she said, this is your truth. Just finally spoken out loud. The judge called for order. The gavel, striking hard. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already assembling their headlines. Inside, it was Kody who was unraveling now. For the first time in years, he wasn't the narrator. He wasn't the favorite. He was exposed. And Janelle. She wasn't just reclaiming her money. She was reclaiming her voice. As the judge prepared to call the next session, she paused and looked directly at Kody. Mr. Brown, she said, you will have your chance to respond. But be warned, truth is not always flattering. And television fame does not excuse betrayal. In the final day of this courtroom saga, Kody finally takes the stand. And what happens next silences the nation. What truth does he finally admit? What damage can't be undone? And will Janelle, after all the pain, finally walk away with the justice she deserves? The final day of court arrived like a shadow that had always been waiting. No camera crews were allowed in today, just a silent, closed courtroom with hearts pounding and futures unraveling. Kody Brown, once the patriarch of a sprawling polygamist empire, entered the courtroom with a somber expression and none of his previous bravado. His hands were empty, his gaze unfocused. He looked neither left nor right. Robyn followed her. Makeup light as if the illusion was no longer worth maintaining. Janelle was already seated, hands folded, as calm as a still lake hiding ancient storms beneath. The judge took her place. Her gavel fell. And just like that, the final reckoning began. Mrs. Brown, the court has heard every claim reviewed, every document, and considered the testimony in its full emotional and legal gravity, the judge began. She glanced at Kody. Mr. Brown, this court sees not just mismanagement of funds, but mismanagement of people. You held their loyalty. You spent it like currency. Kody shifted in his seat. He looked at Robyn, then Janelle, then down at his hands. Janelle stood. She requested to speak one final time. Permission was granted. I was never legally married to Kody, she began. And for most of my marriage, I was told that made me less than, less protected, less legitimate, less heard. But I stayed because I believed in the family, not the man. Because I believed that love, when multiplied, didn't have to be divided. But now I know. She paused, her voice steady and cold, that love cannot exist where respect has died. She turned to Kody. You abandoned our children emotionally, financially, and morally. You let them struggle while you hid. Behind Robyn's fortress, you watched them suffer and claimed it was their fault for not calling you enough. You told me to be grateful for scraps. You taught our sons that their pain was inconvenient. Then, to Robyn, you say you wanted peace? But peace built on silence is just repression. You watched a woman drown and offered her a glass of wine. Robyn began to shake, visibly weeping, but Janelle did not pause. This is not about revenge. This is not about punishment. It's about accountability, and it's long, long overdue. She sat down. The judge turned the page of her notes. This court rules in favor of Janelle Brown. Robyn gasped. Kody's shoulders dropped like a man who had been struck and finally understood the blow. The judge continued. Janelle would receive back payments from Kody for all unpaid support. She would retain full control of her individual property and accounts. The joint business account Robyn had controlled with funds from Janelle's earnings was to be liquidated and repaid. But most devastatingly, the judge declared Kody Brown legally liable for intentional emotional distress toward his children. The record? That ruling wasn't about money, was about legacy, and it destroyed Kody. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy exploded. Headlines were already breaking. Judge slams Kody Brown for weaponizing Silent's sister wives. Star loses major court battle. Janelle Brown wins court rules. Kody emotionally abandoned his family. Robyn in tears as court dismantles polygamist empire. A reporter shouted, "Janelle, how do you feel?" She didn't flinch. She turned to the camera and said, "It wasn't about winning. It was about truth. And I finally got mine." Meanwhile, Kody and Robyn stood frozen on the courthouse steps. She tried to reach for his hand. He pulled away. Now the reporter asked Kody, "Do you regret how things ended with Janelle and the children?" He muttered, "They made their choices." The crowd went silent. Janelle, walking past, turned back one last time. "No, Kody, you made yours. You just never stayed to watch the ending." Weeks later, Robyn vanished from the public eye. Kody attempted to do damage control in a short-lived podcast interview. But when asked, "What would you say to Janelle now?" he replied, "I don't know if she ever loved me." The host was stunned. So were fans. The interview was clipped, dissected, and played millions of times. But Janelle? She didn't respond. She didn't need to. In Flagstaff, Janelle opened a small community wellness center, a place where women could rebuild, reclaim, and rest. She named it The Hearth. Her children painted the sign. It was more than a building. It was a statement. And so the court case ended. But the story didn't. The empire of Kody Brown, a man who built a family brand on unity, ended in division. Not just of assets, but of hearts. Robyn, once the favored wife, now lived in a fortress with echoing halls. Janelle, she walked away not with vengeance, but with power. The quiet power of a woman who had been silenced for decades and finally spoke loud enough to shake the courtroom. Walls fade to black. Credits roll, not with names, but with lessons. That truth, when finally spoken, can undo years of silence. That peace is not built through favor, but through fairness. And that even in a courtroom, the most powerful voice is not the one with money or fame, but the one that has nothing left to lose and everything left to say.